Part 1, Chapter 5, Section 29. A difficult ending. Two Rooks and Pawns. Following our idea that the best way to learn endings as well as openings is to study the games of the masters, we give two more endings of two Rooks and Pawns. These endings, as already stated, are not very common, and the author is fortunate in having himself played more of these endings than is generally the case. By carefully comparing and studying the endings already given, examples 56 and 57, with the following, the student no doubt can obtain an idea of the proper method to be followed in such cases. The way of procedure is somewhat similar in all of them. Example 60. From a game, Capablanca, Cranborg, in the New York State Championship Tournament of 1910. It is Black's move, and no doubt thinking that drawing such a position, that was all Black played for, would be easy, he contented himself with a waiting policy. Such conduct must always be criticized. It often leads to disaster. The best way to defend such positions is to assume the initiative and keep the opponent on the defensive. Rook A, E8. The first move is already wrong. There is nothing to gain by this move. Black should play A5 to be followed by A5 to A4, unless White plays B2 to B3. That would fix the queen side. After that, he could decide what demonstration he can make with his rooks to keep the opponent's rooks at bay. So, Rook A, E8, Rook D4. This move not only prevents F4, which Black intended, but threatens B3, followed after C takes B3 check, A takes B3, by the attack with one or both rooks against Black's A pawn. Rook F6, probably with the idea of a demonstration on the king side by Rook G6 and Rook G2. B3, C takes B3 check, A takes B3, King F7, King D3. Rook A1 should have been played now, in order to force Black to defend with Rook E7. White, however, does not want to disclose his plan at once, and thus awaken Black to the danger of his position. Hence this move, which seems to aim at the disruption of Black's queenside pawns. Rook E7, Rook A1, King E6. This is a mistake. Black is unaware of the danger of his position. He should have played G5, threatening Rook H6, and, by making this demonstration against White's H-pawn, stop the attack against his queenside pawns, which will now develop. Rook A6, Rook C7. He cannot play King D6 because C4 would win at least a pawn. This in itself condemns his last move, King E6, which has done nothing but make his situation practically hopeless. Rook D A4, G5. Now forced, but it is a little too late. He could not play Rook F F7 because C4 would have left his game completely paralyzed. Black now finally awakens to the danger and tries to save the day by the counter demonstration on the king side, which he should have started before. Of course, White cannot play Rook takes A7 because of Rook takes A7 followed by Rook H6, recovering the pawn with advantage. H4, great move. G4. Black is now in a very disagreeable position. If he played G takes H4, Rook takes H4 would leave him in a very awkward situation, as he could not go back with the king, nor could he do much with either rook. He practically would have to play H6, when White would answer B4, threatening to win a pawn by B5, or, if that were not enough, he might play King D4 to be followed finally by the entry of the king at C5 or E5. King E2. G takes F3 check. Again, he cannot play H5 because F4 would leave him paralyzed. The advance of his H-pawn would make White's H-pawn safe, and consequently his king's rook would have to retire to f7 to defend the a pawn. That would make it impossible for his king to go to d7 because of the a pawn, nor could he advance a single one of his pawns. On the other hand, white would play b3 to b4, threatening to win a pawn by b4 to b5. Or he might first play king d4, and then at the proper time, b3 to b4 to b5, if there was nothing better. Black, meanwhile, could really do nothing but mark time with one of his rooks. Compare this bottling up system with the ending in example 57, and it will be seen that it is very similar. King takes f3, rook f7, king e2. Probably wrong. b4 at once was the right move. The text move gives black good chances of drawing. King d6, b4, rook b7. This could never have happened had white played b4, as he could have followed it up by b5 after black's king d6. h5. Not good. f4 offered the best chances of winning by force. If then, rook g7, h5, rook g2 check, king d3, rook h2, rook takes a7, rook takes a7, rook takes a7, rook takes h5, rook a6 with winning chances. h6. Black misses his last chance. f4 would draw. If then, e takes f4, rook b e7 check, great move. King f1, rook takes f4, rook takes a7, rook e3, great move. f4, rook g7, king d3, rook g e7, rook a1, rook g7, king d4, rook g2, rook 6 a2, rook b g7. Rook g g7 would have offered greater resistance, but the position is lost in any case. I leave the student to work this out. King d3, great move. Rook takes a2, rook takes a2, rook e7. Nothing would avail. If rook g1, then rook a6, great move. Rook d1, check. King c2, rook h1, b5, rook takes h5, rook takes c6 check, king d7, rook a6, and white will win easily. Rook g2, rook e6, rook g7, rook e7, rook g8, c5. Black is desperate. He sees he can no longer defend his pawns. Rook g6 check, rook e6, b takes c5 check, king d7, rook g7 check, king c6, rook takes a7, king takes c5, rook f7, resigns. Example 61. From the game Capablanca-Janowski, New York National Tournament of 1913. Black's game has the disadvantage of his double C pawns, which, to make matters worse, he cannot advance, because as soon as black plays b7 to b6, white replies b3 to b4. It is on this fact that white builds his plans. He will stop black's queenside pawns from advancing, and will then bring his own king to e3. Then, in due time, he will play d3 to d4, and finally e4 to e5, or g4 to g5, thus forcing an exchange of pawns and obtaining in that way a clear passed pawn on the king's file. It will be seen that this plan was carried out during the course of the game, and that white obtained his winning advantage in that way. The play was based throughout on the chance of obtaining a passed pawn on the king's file, with which white expected to win. G4, already preparing to play G4 to G5 when the time comes. B6, black wants to play C6 to C5, but white, of course, prevents it. B4, great move. King B7. This king should come to the king's side where the danger lurks. King F2, B5. With the object of playing King B6 and A6 to A5, followed by A5 takes B4, and thus have an open file for his rook and be able to make a counter demonstration on the queen side in order to stop white's advance on the right. White, however, also prevents this. A4, great move. Rook D4. Of course, if B takes A4, black will have all his pawns on the queen side disrupted and isolated, and white can easily regain the lost pawn by playing either rook on the A file. Rook B1, Rook E5. He still wants to play C6 to C5, but as it is easy to foresee that white will again prevent it, the text move is really a serious loss of time. Black should bring his king over to the other side immediately. King E3, Rook D7, A5. The first part of white's strategic plan is now accomplished. Black's pawns on the queen side are fixed for all practical purposes. Rook E6. If Rook takes F5, then G takes F5 would have given white a very powerful center, yet it might have been the best chance for black. Rook B F1, Rook D E7, G5, F takes G5, Rook takes G5. The second part of white's strategical plan is now accomplished. It remains to find out if the advantage obtained is sufficient to win. White not only has a passed pawn, but his king is in a commanding position in the center of the board, ready to support the advance of white's pawns, or, if necessary, to go to c5, or to move to the right wing in case of danger. Besides, white holds the open file with one of his rooks. Altogether, white's position is superior, and his chances of winning are excellent. Rook h6, Rook g3, Rook he6. To prevent d3 to d4. Also, black fears to keep his rook in front of his two kingside pawns, which he may want to utilize later. h4, g6, Rook g5, h6. White threatens h4 to h5, which would finally force black to take, and then white would double his rooks against the isolated pawn and win it, or tie up black's rooks completely. The text move, however, only helps white. Therefore, black had nothing better than to hold tight and wait. Rook e5 would not help much, as white would simply answer Rook f8, Rook e8, Rook takes e5, and whichever rook black took, white would have an easy game. The student should carefully study these variations. Rook g4, Rook g7, d4, King c8, Rook f8 check, King b7. King d7 would not help much, but since he made the previous move, he should now be consistent and play it. e5, g5, King e4, Rook e7, h takes g5, h takes g5, Rook f5, King c8, Rook g takes g5, Rook h7, Rook h5, King d7, Rook takes h7, Rook takes h7, Rook f8, Rook h4 check, King d3, Rook h3 check, King d2, c5, b takes c5, Rook a3, d5, resigns. The winning tactics in all these endings have merely consisted in keeping the opponent's rooks tied to the defense of one or more pawns, leaving my own rooks free for action. This is a general principle which can be equally applied to any part of the game. It means in general terms, keep freedom of maneuver while hampering your opponent. There is one more thing of great importance, and that is the winning side has always had a general strategical plan capable of being carried out with the means at his disposal, while often the losing side had no plan at all, but simply moved according to the needs of the moment.